Undeclared wars are commonplace. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no complaints from the American people. Sadly, we have become accustomed to living with the illegitimate use of force by government. To develop a truly free society, the issue of initiating force must be understood and rejected.
What if sometimes, to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. Aaron Maté joins us now. Aaron, thank you very much. I want to ask you in some depth your view of the likely outcome of the U.S.-Iranian negotiations and whether the American side is even serious. But before we get there, you pointed out to me something that got under your skin and under my skin as well. This gentleman, Brett McGurk, an arch Zionist who was a purported negotiator for the Biden administration, claimed that Iran's attacks on Israel have been unprovoked. I mean, how can he make a statement like that? They've been in self-defense.
Yeah, Brett McGurk was making this comment on CNN in the context of why he thinks a U.S. attack on Iran is inevitable. And his point was, he was endorsing the neocon position, the Israel first position, that a agreement with Iran that simply addresses its nuclear program is not enough. Iran also has to basically give up its ability to defend itself via its ballistic missile program and also stop support to its allies in the region. And McGurk said that unless Iran agrees to that, then Trump has to strike. And yes, he argued that it's especially important that Iran give up its ballistic missile program because it previously launched an unprovoked attack on Israel. And he was referring to the fall of 2024 when Brett McGurk was in the Biden administration. Now, what he left out is that after Iran launched that so-called unprovoked attack, that was after Israel had attacked Iran's consulate in Damascus the previous spring, and then more recently at that point had assassinated the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran, inside Iran. So Israel had recently launched attacks on Iran in Syria at its diplomatic facility, which is considered Iranian property, and also directly inside Iran. Also had assassinated the leader of Hezbollah, a close Iranian ally, Hassan Nasrallah, in Lebanon. And Israel expanding its aggression into Lebanon was done with the encouragement of people like Brett McGurk. Him and Jake Sullivan encouraged Israel to, seize on its destruction of Gaza, its genocide there, and go further and go after its enemies inside Lebanon. So for Brett McGurk to advocate bombing Iran while complaining about Iran launching unprovoked attacks, when really Iran's just been trying to defend itself, it's the height of hubris.
Is the American side serious about negotiating? Because if it's taking orders from Netanyahu, he'll never let the negotiations be successful. He'll just keep adding conditions and adding conditions. He added a new one last week. Not only must Iran agree not to enrich beyond a certain level, they've already agreed to that. Not only must Iran agree to inspections, they've already agreed to that, but that which has already been enriched must leave Iran and go somewhere else. They've tentatively agreed to that, but the equipment used to enrich, even that equipment used to enrich for civilian purposes, must be destroyed. No matter what Iran agrees to, Netanyahu will add another condition, and Trump and the American side will accept that addition.
Yeah, and the fundamental problem here is that Trump and his team have embraced this negotiating position, which insists on an Iranian humiliation. So take the issue of enrichment. Iran developed that enrichment capability under heavy assault for decades from the U.S. under sanctions. The U.S. doing things like supporting Saddam Hussein as Saddam Hussein was launching chemical attacks against Iranians. The constant threats from Israel, the acts of aggression by Israel and the U.S., and throughout all this, the assassinations of Iranian scientists. Throughout all this, Iran has developed the ability to enrich, which it's used, as everybody knows, for peaceful purposes. And now the U.S. is saying even peaceful enrichment is off limits for you. So the U.S. is insisting on humiliation, which Iran will not accept. Now, the problem here is that the obvious solution on the table is simply to return to the Iran nuclear deal. But the problem there is that it's Trump that destroyed that nuclear deal. So for Trump, it would be a personal humiliation if he simply goes back to the agreement that he himself destroyed. So if we're going to avoid a U.S. military strike here, Iran would have to do something additional that was not under the terms of the Iran nuclear deal. And I was thinking maybe the one avenue for some compromise there from Iran is that, well, look, there was a sunset clause in the JCPOA. Its terms are going to expire. Maybe they could redo the JCPOA, but make it more permanent. So with no sunset clauses. But even there, that's not enough for Trump, who's so close to Netanyahu. And Netanyahu wants to take away Iran's ability to defend itself with its ballistic missile program and also cease support to its allies. And the Trump administration continues to insist on, at minimum, Iran doing something to abandon support for its allies, including Hezbollah, which is amazing, given especially that, look, the power of groups like Hezbollah has seriously been weakened. I mean, we can't deny that the pager attacks that Israel launched, the assassination of Nasrallah, the overthrow of the government of Syria, which was a key ally of Hezbollah and Iran, these already have been major blows to Iran and its allies. But yet still, because Israeli-U.S. hegemony is the paramount imperative here, the U.S. will insist to Iran that it undergo additional humiliations and basically formalize the weakening of the alliance that resists Israel. And this is a very proud government in Tehran, and I don't see them going along with that.
Did the JCPOA eliminate or block, or I'm not sure what their status was at the time, American sanctions on Iran?
They were supposed to offer some sanctions relief, and there was a little bit of that. But even there, Obama didn't even fully implement the sanctions relief that he agreed to. And of course, Trump, by tearing up the JCPOA, reimposed those sanctions to the fullest. Amazingly now, from what I understand, everything I've heard is that Trump isn't even offering sanctions relief right now. What he's basically offering Iran is that
the ships will go away.
Yeah, is the possibility that they won't be destroyed and won't be subject to an act of aggression.
Well, this is like negotiating with the mob when they have a gun to your head.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's, the Don Row doctrine really is a Mafia Don doctrine. And that's what we've seen on display everywhere, including in Trump's own hemisphere, where, he kidnapped Venezuela's president, forced Venezuela to accept U.S. dictates, is now starving Cuba by cutting off fuel deliveries, including from countries like Venezuela. It's absolutely a Mafia Don doctrine in effect.
Well, our friend and colleague Max Blumenthal has reported that that doctrine is being used on the new interim president of Venezuela. Max believes she's been indicted by a grand jury in the Southern District of New York, and they're holding that indictment over her head and threatening to kidnap her if she doesn't do what Trump wants.
Which Trump openly said. He said that Delcy Rodriguez better do what we say, or else she's going to face similar consequences to Maduro. In fact, even worse, he said. He threatened even worse. So we all know what that means.
Here's the $64,000 question, in my opinion. What happens if the U.S. and Iran come to an agreement and reduce it to writing, and Netanyahu objects to it?
Well, last time that happened between the U.S. and Iran, Netanyahu tried to stop it. He came to Congress to try to lobby senators and Congress members against the JCPOA. But ultimately, Obama overruled Netanyahu, which is not an easy feat if you're a U.S. president to go against the Israeli prime minister, and the deal was reached. And Netanyahu had to wait until he had a more pliant president in office, which is Trump, who then broke the JCPOA. But look, I've always believed that Netanyahu will not defy Trump if Trump ultimately decides that he wants to do a deal with Iran. I just don't see Trump ever defying Netanyahu. I've never seen him do it. Even when Trump brokered the so-called ceasefire, there was a lot of talk that, yes, Trump did use his leverage over Netanyahu, unlike Biden. But really, was he really standing up to Netanyahu? Because Israel's killings of Palestinians in Gaza continued after the so-called ceasefire. Trump put Netanyahu on his Orwellian board of peace, which is basically an attempt to destroy what's left of Gaza's culture and history and replace it with this dystopian, area for Trump and his friends to make a lot of money off.
How many Palestinian representatives are on that board of peace?
Well, zero, exactly. So, but look, if a miracle happens and Trump decides at the last minute that the costs of going to war against Iran are too high, he wants to do a deal, and again, I think it's highly unlikely, I do think Netanyahu would fall in line.
This character, McGurk, in the same interview predicted war in 2 to 3 weeks. Now, that interview is just 2 or 3 days old.
Yeah. The one factor here is that, look, Iran's a huge country and has significant capabilities to defend itself and to inflict damage. So the U.S. has moved a huge amount of firepower into the region. 1/3 of deployed U.S. naval assets are surrounding Iran. Major aircraft carriers, bombers, all those things. But is there enough there to sustain a long-term war with a major power like Iran? I don't think so. And that's not what I hear. So if there is military action by Trump, I suspect if it happens, it would be relatively short. I don't think we'd be looking at a very, very long war, because for that to happen, the U.S. would have to deploy a lot more assets than it currently has.
Well, if the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz and gasoline in America goes up to $10 a gallon, Trump will feel that pain in a week.
Well, yes, but even there, this is where the Israel lobby, I think, feels like it has a lot of cards, because I think they're confident that it's that because the U.S. already has so much oil of its own, from its own reserves and from other sources, including now possibly from Venezuela, which the U.S. has taken over, that U.S. consumers would be immune from any hike at the pumps. It would be more consumers in Europe, which the U.S. doesn't care about.
I don't know about that. The oil industry, as I understand it, is all based upon what you think the price is going to be in the future. That stuff goes up overnight, even if it's still flowing, if they think something negative is going to happen in the future. Look, I don't want gas to be at $10 a gallon. I also don't want innocent Iranians to be killed, and I don't want Iran to be broken up, and I don't want Benjamin Netanyahu running our foreign policy.
Me either. And so I hope you're right, because if higher gas prices here could help deter an assault on Iran, of course, that would be a very, like, I'd want to see that too, despite the pain here, because we don't want to see another war. We don't want to see all these Iranians suffer. I'm just saying the neocons are so cynical that they really think of everything. And you have to look at Venezuela, and maybe even in the context of that opening up access to more oil to steal, from their point of view, would be a way to blunt the impact of deliberately raising energy prices through an attack on Iran. Here's
the Iranian foreign minister on Tuesday, after their last yesterday, after their last session. Chris, number 17.
Today, we held the second round of negotiations with the American delegation indirectly at the Omani embassy in Geneva. The consultations had started at the beginning of the day. Mr. Grossi came to Geneva, and we had good technical discussions with him. He also met with the American delegation, and I can say that in this round, compared to the previous round, Extremely serious and in-depth discussions were held, and the overall atmosphere was notably more constructive than before. A wide variety of different ideas were proposed by the group, and each of these ideas was then very seriously and thoroughly discussed. And ultimately, we were finally able to reach a solid agreement on a comprehensive set of guiding principles. We reached a general agreement. Starting from this very moment, we will continue to proceed based on those fundamental principles. We will enter the text of a possible agreement. This does not mean that we can reach an agreement quickly, but at least the process has begun.
Now, do the Americans say the same thing, or do they say nothing? I haven't seen anything public from Witkoff or Kushner after meeting with him for 2 days.
First of all, one reason to doubt the any kind of positive outcome is the fact that the talks are being led by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Jared Kushner, who doesn't even have an official U.S. government position, he just happens to be the son-in-law of the president. While also, meanwhile, they're also leading the talks over another geopolitical crisis, which is Ukraine. So in a situation where just two people, one of whom doesn't even have a government position, they have very little experience in government. They're not diplomats. They're not country experts on either Iran or Russia and Ukraine, are leading not just one but two rounds of negotiations on these major crises. It just doesn't inspire confidence. And yes, in terms of public statements, I haven't seen what Witkoff or Kushner said, but J.D. Vance said that, yeah, the talks were okay, but Iran is not showing much wiggle room on our red line. They're not listening to our red lines. And he didn't specify what that means, but I'm pretty sure that means
well, here he is,
allies and its ballistic missile program.
This is a little bit painful to watch, but here he is, the Vice President of the United States, yesterday on all of this. Chris, number 4.
What the president has been very clear with the Iranians, and actually I just talked to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner this morning about some of their negotiations, is the United States has certain red lines. Our primary interest here is we don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. We don't want nuclear proliferation. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, there are a lot of other regimes, some friendly, some not so friendly, who would get nuclear weapons after them. That would be a disaster for the American people, because then you have these crazy regimes all over the world with the most dangerous weapons in the world. And that's one of the things the president has said he's going to prevent. Now, we would very much like, as the president has said, to resolve this through a conversation and a diplomatic negotiation. But the president has all options on the table. And, one thing about the negotiation I will say this morning is, in some ways it went well. They agreed to meet afterwards. But in other ways, it was very clear that the president has set some red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to actually acknowledge and work through. So we're going to keep on working it, but of course the president reserves the ability to say when he thinks that diplomacy has reached its natural end. We hope we don't get to that point, but if we do, that'll be the president's call.
Say what the red lines are, because some of them are absurd. What country in its right mind, in proximity of another country that wants to destroy and divide it, would get rid of its offensive missile and other weaponry?
Exactly right. J.D. Vance won't say what the red lines are because he knows that those red lines for Iran are non-starters. He also knows that if he articulates the red line that Trump has set on Iran, then he would newly expose to a MAGA audience that all their claims about not seeking regime change and trying to police the world and nation build were just a complete lie. And their claims about being America first were a complete lie, because all these so-called red lines that Trump has are formulated for the interests of one country and one country alone, that is Israel, trying to limit Iran's ability to defend itself from Israeli aggression, and trying to limit Iran's ability to help other people who resist Israeli aggression in the region. That's not America first. It's not America first to insist that Israel maintain the ability to steal other people's land and kill a bunch of people without any resistance. How is that America first? And so that's why J.D. Vance can articulate what Trump's red lines are. And he talks there about how we don't want to see nuclear weapons, and that's our main concern. If that was their main concern, they would go back to the Iran nuclear deal, which Trump killed in his first term. Or they would endorse proposals like Iran has put forward for a nuclear-free Middle East, where nobody has nuclear weapons. And that would include Israel. And therefore, because the Trump administration is Israel first, that's a non-starter. So this idea that they're concerned about nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation It's a complete lie, because if anyone's done anything to increase the threat that Iran might one day try to get nuclear weapons, it's the Trump administration, by tearing up the JCPOA and then using diplomacy as a cover to launch aggression, as they did last year.
So back in June, apparently Netanyahu asked Trump, you got to stop this 12-day war because the Iranians are crushing us. And then supposedly in January said to Trump, don't attack, we're not ready. What's different now?
Well, they have had more time to build up their air defenses. So if Netanyahu is now encouraging Trump to go ahead, then that means Netanyahu feels as if they could absorb any Iranian retaliation. And I don't know if they have or not. I was surprised at the damage that Iran inflicted on Israel last time. I suspect that Netanyahu was as well. But look, Netanyahu is full of hubris and he's cocky. And maybe he feels as if now is the time that now he can absorb whatever consequences might come from launching another round of aggression against Iran.
Here is former Netanyahu chief of staff and former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett making a rather startling statement, at least to me, about Turkey. Chris, number 18.
I want to be very clear. Turkey and Qatar have gained influence in Syria, are seeking influence elsewhere and everywhere throughout the region. And from here, I warn, Turkey is the new Iran. Erdogan is sophisticated, dangerous, and he seeks to encircle Israel. We can't close our eyes again. And while some senior Israelis were on Qatar's payroll, Qatar and Turkey are nourishing the Islamic Brotherhood monster that is growing and eventually might become as dangerous as the one created by Iran. Turkey and Qatar are gaining influence not only in Syria, but also in Gaza, through the front door, and everywhere, and trying to create a new choke ring. Turkey is trying to flip Saudi Arabia against us and establish a hostile Sunni axis with nuclear Pakistan.
Direct attack on Netanyahu because the reference to high-ranking Israeli officials on the Qatar payroll were officials in Netanyahu's office.
Listen, I wish what he was saying were true, because I think it'd be good if the region stood up to Israel for everyone's sake, because Israel, I think, is an existential threat to the entire planet. But I've always thought that, the sort of war of words between Israel and Turkey was a bit inflated and was done to the self-interest of both sides, because, Erdogan, while he talks tough on Israel, he still facilitates lucrative sales of energy to Israel. So the one thing he could have done to put pressure on Israel during the genocide by cutting off those energy sales, he didn't do, while still talking tough. And I suspect that's what Israel is doing here too. So, for example, he complains about the influence that Turkey's developed inside of Syria. Well, Israel participated in that. They were allies of Turkey in Syria in the regime change war against the Assad government that left Syria in ruins. So now, the one part of this that I think might be genuine is that Israel is so paranoid and it's so filled with supremacy that, after partnering with someone tacitly, like Israel did with Turkey and Syria, it can easily turn on anybody, because any other government that's powerful, has a large landmass, has some influence, can easily be seen as a threat in the eyes of Israel, which aims to dominate everywhere. And anytime any government it does not act in line with Israeli interests and can somewhat be a deterrent to what's called Greater Israel, this constantly expanding Israeli state, then yes, maybe Israel will turn on them. So possibly that's what we're seeing here. But I also just have to note that Turkey as a threat to Israel, I just don't take seriously, given how often it's tacitly partnered with Israel, including during the genocide.
A great analysis. Before we go, Chris put together a montage for you about someone that you and I have both admired a great deal. Chris?
I am somebody. I am somebody. Respect me. Protect me. Never neglect me. I am somebody. Nobody will save us from us, for us, but us. I may be unskilled, but I am somebody. I wasn't always on television. Writers were not always outside my door. When I was born late one afternoon, October 8th, in Greenville, South Carolina, no writers asked my mother her name. Nobody chose to write down our address. A mama was not supposed to make it, and I was not supposed to make it. Every one of these funny labels they put on you, those of you who are watching this broadcast tonight in the projects, on the corners, I understand. Call you outcast, low down, you can't make it, you're nothing, you're from nobody, subclass, underclass. When you see Jesse Jackson, when my name goes in nomination, your name goes in nomination. I was born in the slum, but the slum was not born in me. And it wasn't born in you, and you can make it. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. On tomorrow night and beyond. Keep hope alive. I love you very much.
Such an inspiring person. Words can't do him justice, but his commitment to social justice, his refusal to go the path of so many other Democrats, which is to, speak in progressive language at home, but adopt the language of hegemony abroad. He stood up to U.S. hegemony and paid a price for it. And the fact that he was still able to maintain such national influence, the fact that, yesterday after his passing, people across the spectrum were paying tribute to him, including J.D. Vance, showed the respect he had because he was a rare person of principle and also just an amazingly talented political speaker and activist and leader. And on the issue of Palestine, which we speak so much about, few people in this country have been so instrumental in making Palestine a national issue. And way before anybody else did, Jesse Jackson was advocating for Palestinian self-determination, paid a huge price for it, including from within his own party. There's a clip circulating of Chuck Schumer, a young Chuck Schumer, bragging to his Zionist audience that he stood up to Jesse Jackson when Jesse Jackson was trying to get a call for a Palestinian state included in the Democratic Party's platform. And Chuck Schumer, he represents the leadership of the party, as we can see now in all the young people who protest Israel, who are against genocide. Jesse Jackson spoke for them before they were even born, and so now so many young people carry on Jesse Jackson's legacy.
So I was at a basketball game in Madison Square Garden to watch the Knicks with Bill O'Reilly, and all of a sudden we spotted Jesse Jackson in the audience, and Bill goes, come on, we're going to go up and say hello to him. I'm going to get him on the show. So the two of us run down to where Jackson is sitting, and Jackson is busting Bill's chops, claiming he doesn't know who Bill is, but he knows who I am. He eventually, of course, hugged the two of us and came on Bill's show, but showed a side of his personality that I can't forget. Aaron, thank you very much. Thanks for all you do for us. Thanks for accommodating my schedule today, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Judge.
Sure. All the best. Coming up at 2 o'clock, if you're watching us live in 28 minutes, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and at 3 o'clock, the great Phil Giraldi. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.